Voodoo politics. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Let me start off the week with this. The enemies of Hillary Clinton, by that I mean the partisan enemies, have got their voodoo doll. It's called Benghazi. Every time they put the pin in, they hope it hurts Hillary. Every time they say the word, they hope it scares her. And now they've got a select committee, an official committee of the Congress devoted entirely to putting in the pins. It will endure for months and quite plausibly years as they stick it into Benghazi. And every time they want to hurt the person they fear will loom as unbeatable in 2016. Just listening to the chanting and incantations as they dwell on the incident they hope will puncture the political brand of the former Secretary of State. They want her and every voter in the country, when they hear the word Benghazi, to think Hillary Clinton. It's become an obsession bordering on cultism among Republicans, with even John Boehner falling under its spell. You can almost smell the incense. Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. They keep chanting the word until it gets Hillary to fall. Could the cause of this bizarre rite be a secret Republican fear that while Hillary Clinton may be strongly positioned on the center left, they've got nobody on the center right to stand up to her? Now that Christie's got stuck on the bridge and Jeb doesn't know whether he's going or coming. Howard Fineman is the editorial director of the Huffington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, and Michael Hirsch is national editor of Politico magazine. Michael, you were the one in your column that inspired this discussion. In an article for Politico, you called it the Benghazi industrial complex. Quoting your piece, "It's already too late for the truth. Benghazi has taken on a cultural life of its own on the right. It's become embedded in the Democratic demonology of the conservative base. It is now shorthand for a new generation of right-wing conspiracy theorizing about the Clintons that Republican candidates know will excite conservative voters. Benghazi has become to the 2010s what Vince Foster and Whitewater were to the 1990s. You also say it's partly about trying to make Hillary Clinton so disgusted with this nonsense, she just decides to stay out of the race. Tell us about your reporting, Michael, how you've gotten into this. I think so well, but tell me what you know.
Well, first of all, Chris, I don't think that Benghazi as an issue would have much impact on Hillary were she the Democratic nominee for president. I think the polls show that. To me, the bigger question is that, as my political colleagues Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman reported in the magazine this week, her principal ambivalence about running at all is getting back into this ugly political game that she has been dealing with for 20 years since she was First Lady and the Vince Foster allegations first came up. It's no accident that some of the conspiracy theorists around Benghazi are harking back to Vince Foster and did he really commit suicide in Fort Marcy Park and so forth. And I think that that's really the question. The question is, she has not committed herself to getting into the race yet. Does she really want to jump back into what she knows is going to be very, very ugly? And I think that's where all of this Benghazi conspiracy theorizing could have some impact on her.
Yeah, this almost near religious thing, Howard, of this Benghazi thing. And I had the weird sense about this, and everything's open to inquiry, and it should be, but it's like they don't want to inquire. They just want people to think bad, dark stuff, things evil happened here. And they don't really want to get to the bottom of it, if there is a bottom.
Well, Chris, if they got to the bottom of it, they'd find that there wasn't much there, and then they would have to think of something else to run 2014 and 2016 on. They want this to go on forever. They want a list of potential witnesses for this new select committee as long as the dictionary, because they want to keep it going all the way through. There's some other elements here. I think Mike's piece is absolutely terrific. But don't forget, the guy who's head of this new committee is a Tea Party guy from South Carolina, Trey Gowdy. He's all Tea Party. The Tea Party has loved this from the beginning, as Mike says. It's a great fundraising thing.
What does it say?
It's a fundraising thing for the
said,
entire
you and I remember,
yeah.
at the end of the Vietnam War, thank God, around 1972, right before the election, Kissinger said, it was Secretary of State, peace is at hand, okay? A little bit early, a little bit premature, okay? Right. But nobody sits around thinking about this. At worst, what the Obama people are guilty of, at worst, and this is taking the total Republican argument, they spun it a bit more in one direction than the other, okay?
I think so. I mean, having read,
if it's true, there's no proof.
Read the documents. That's all it is so far. They somehow have to try to prove that there was premeditated intent to mislead based on actual knowledge of exactly what was going to happen and what happened. They're never going to find it. I think they know they're never going to find it. But as you say, it's a matter of faith, especially with the Tea Party, and especially given the sort of demonization of Hillary tradition that Mike talks about. I will say this, though. I don't think, based on the people I know and the reporting I've done, that it's going to scare Hillary off in the least. I think her view is she's seen the worst of it. She's survived the worst of it. What didn't kill her made her stronger.
Yeah, I think.
And she will roll over these people, especially because there's every possibility that the Trey Gowdies of the world are going to overplay their hand.
And by the way, Hillary's a strong person. She ran for the Senate up in New York. She did a lot of things. Can she walk away and say, I quit because of Benghazi? No. Okay, Benghazi has become a code word of sorts for the right. They're setting up a word association. Hear the word Benghazi, think Hillary Clinton. This weekend, Utah Republican Jason Chaffetz on Meet the Press referenced Clinton multiple times in regards to this so-called, I don't even want to call it a scandal, this thing. Let's watch.
I have a document in my hands, an internal State Department document that goes to Cheryl Mills, Hillary Clinton's chief of staff. This is on September 12th. The State Department had told the president of the Libyan Congress that it was Ansar al-Sharia, a terrorist organization that had committed these attacks. What happened, for instance, as journalists, you do not know the answer as to why was the ambassador there. What happened, for instance, on April 6, 2012, when our facility was bombed? It was bombed again on June 6 of 2012. The British ambassador had assassination attempt. What did Secretary Clinton do to secure that facility?
Chris Stevens, the ambassador, was there at that facility in Benghazi because he wanted to be there. It was his call. That's the way the world works, Congressman. You ought to figure that one out. Ambassadors make their own decisions. Anyway, meanwhile, Fox News host Eric Bolling made this allegation about why Hillary Clinton didn't go on the Sunday shows that weekend.
Hillary Clinton was the one who was supposed to, A, testify, and then B, go on those talk shows, and be asked the question, why did you what's the reason for the terror attack? And she was the one who would have had to have said, well, it was the video that caused the attack. They knew she couldn't do that because she was going to run in 2016, and they could not throw her under the bus at that point. So she hits her head. She has to spend 2 weeks out of commission, can't testify, can't go on the talk shows, and they send Susan Rice to do her dirty work.
Amazing how somebody can talk with all that blabber and no information. Anyway, for the record, Bolling, this guy, didn't even get the timing right. Clinton's injuries, the head injury, occurred months after the Sunday show appearances by Rice. Months after. And by the way, she did testify before the Congress. Of course, some on the lunar right, like that guy, go even further. One Tea Party group recently blogged, this is how far they go now, Hillary Clinton, the butcher of Benghazi. I think, Michael, you're right on point here. This seems to be the only cartridge they have in their bullet, in their belt here, because I would go back to this, that Hillary Clinton is a notch or two to the right on foreign policy from the president. I think we'd all agree, especially on Middle East politics. She's very much in the Democratic center, in the interest group center on things like trade, where she's not so big for it like Bill. She's very much positioned right where you want to be in the sweet spot. They don't have a Republican even close to the sweet spot to beat her. The closest was Christie, and he's stuck on the bridge.
Yeah, I think their best shot, frankly, is to try to knock her out of the race before she decides to get into it. In other words, to deter her from entering, because I do think, there's no Democratic field that can challenge her. I think everyone is in agreement on that. And you have utter disarray on the Republican side with no one really able to take up the flag nationally, at least as yet. So, I do think the Benghazi industrial complex, as we've called it, is largely about smearing her as best they can before any decisions are even made.
But Michael, why would this threat of a poo storm, to use a terrible phrase, that she's just going to have to walk through this crap, basically, which is crap, because there's no way to work your way through it, really. It just is going to be, if it isn't the failure to plan for more security, or the incidents that night, or the later spin there, they just go they just keep going from one issue to another, no matter what you say, and they're never going to stop. So I guess she's just going to have to say to herself, maybe go to Howard on this, she's just going to have to say to herself, this is something I don't have to deal with.
Well, she is going to deal with it. Her book, as Mike points out.
By the way, book's coming much faster than the campaign.
As Mike points out in his piece, her book is coming. She's going to give as detailed explanation as she ever has or ever will give. That's going to be the orthodoxy in that book. I think she's prepared for it. I think.
And by the way, her editors and publishers at Simon & Schuster, which published me, they're going to vet it. They're going to say this has to directly hit the public concern here,
and it's
the right-wing crazy concern
and in fact, the investigations of the other investigations have already taken place. Have said, in fact, there were administrative problems in the State Department about security, and Hillary has owned up to that. And she has said that her worst concern, like her biggest regret as Secretary of State, is the fact that they didn't do more. But what the Republicans are going to have to try to prove is that somehow she willfully, deliberately was not on her watch, which is impossible to show. I'm just saying.
I mean, you're saying you're right, but
it's for Chris. It's for fundraising. Ultimately, in my view,
Michael,
on the Tea Party,
let me appeal to you on this. In overseas situations, especially in a country like Libya, which was still at war, it had no real government. We were getting protected by militias in that area of Benghazi. We have outposts that have been attacked in ways that were not prepared over in Afghanistan. Months after months, it would go on these terrible situations where GIs were stuck out there in the middle of nowhere and overrun by the Taliban. Nobody's making this is life in a dangerous world. What do you think Benghazi was like? It was a dangerous place that Chris Stevens, who everybody loved, had the guts to go into, and things broke bad. The militias weren't there to help them. They were on the other side. These were judgments made on the ground. How many soldiers are we supposed to have following around diplomats in dangerous areas? You can't bring soldiers into those areas. Those situations will not permit it. But anyway, that's too much common sense.
No, I mean, it's been debunked. I mean, even the House Armed Services Committee, majority Republicans came to the conclusion that there was no way to militarily save Stevens and the 3 other Americans who died. So you have even the Republican right is divided on this question. And you're right, Stevens was in a very unusual situation. He knew a lot of these people because he had been there before, and so it was a unique situation. But she does have to answer some questions about security procedures. There are legitimate questions here.
Sure.
It's just it doesn't have anything to do with the scandal that the Republicans are trying to gin up.
Yeah, I'm always impressed when George Will comes out and says basically the Democrats will be smart not to participate in this so-called select committee. I found that fascinating. It must have disheartened some of them. By the way, Charles Krauthammer, another huge brain on the right, said basically they missed their chance on this baby the first time through. Anyway, thank you, Michael Hirsch, and thank you, Howard Fineman, as always.
Thank you.
Howard, especially you. Coming up, want to talk about a real scandal? How about the hype that got us into Iraq? Remember how the smoking gun was going to be a nuclear mushroom cloud? Well, that trail of the seat still hectors members of the Bush administration. Probably will forever, and it should. Plus, the great Republican proxy war in North Carolina.